Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining today's webinar, Your Electric Bill, Where It's Been and Where It's Headed. My name is Gabe Amy, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Cape Fear Solar Systems. If you've not joined one of our webinars in the past, thanks for joining. If you have, thanks for joining again, and we'll get right into it. So before diving too deep, we'll jump in on our agenda here. In a moment, I'll talk a little bit about who we are here at Cape Fear Solar Systems. I see some familiar names, so looks like some of you are familiar with us already. That's okay. If you're new, then we'll get to tell you a little bit about who we are. Then we'll speak to breaking down your electric bill. There's a lot of mystification around how we're billed for electricity, what all goes into it. We'll look at some specific bills for Duke Energy customers, and a lot of those things will apply to other customers as well. Then we'll look at historical utility rate trends here specifically in North Carolina, but a lot of these go for other states as well. Then we'll look at those case studies from other states of how they've seen significant increases and what drove some of those increases. Before speaking about upcoming pressures on the grid and future rate expectations, how can we predict or understand what might happen to our rates moving forward? And then we'll, of course, come back to, why we're here as an organization in terms of how solar can help homeowners actually take control and hedge their bets against some of these rate increases that are likely to come down the stretch. And of course, as always, we'll do some Q&A at the end. We've got our colleagues here, John Patton and Caleb Timothy, who will be available to answer questions from the conversations that they have every day with homeowners about what it looks like to go solar for their home. And we're happy to speak to what we're seeing in terms of real world impact to utility bills during that time as well. So feel free to submit any questions into the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of our time today. Thank you. All right, so Cape Fear Solar Systems, we've been founded since, I guess we were founded in 2007, so been in business now for 18 years. We've done over 4,500 installations in and around southeastern North Carolina, operating in about a 3-hour radius of Wilmington, North Carolina, and are, of course, headquartered here in Wilmington. You can see in the picture there on the left, that is our warehouse here down by South Front Street. If you're local and want to visit us, we always encourage folks to come on in, check out our warehouse and demo area. Just reach out to a member of our team and we'd love to show you around. It's also where we have 70 plus employees come in who are part of our installation teams, our warehouse teams, our project teams that help make sure that each one of these installations goes smoothly. And this map also gets to show some of the local projects that we're particularly proud of, and work that you might see around town here as well. In our years of business, we now have pretty consistently been voted the #1 solar installer in southeastern North Carolina. And of course, our focus is on solar, battery, and EV charging solutions. So if you have a question about any of those, then we're the right place to be able to guide you through that. All right, so we'll jump right in here. I wanted to start off just by looking at what that utility bill looks like. For many of us, we might receive it in the mail. A lot of us have gone to receiving these digitally. I myself receive mine exclusively digitally. And so this is a real utility bill, actually from a homeowner who worked with us, but this is prior to having gone solar. So what we can see here are a couple of different things, right? We can see on the left, we've got the previous payment due, but we've got the current electric charges, as well as the products and services, taxes, and our total amount due. We're all familiar with seeing this is what's due, this is what we need to pay. And for some of us, we might not really understand what that means, how we got there, how we can influence that. We also have this graph of our electric usage history, so we can see that trend changing over time. So that's the kilowatt hours moving from month to month in terms of how much energy we're using. It's helpful to understand, what that trend is seasonally into the summer where we've got a peak, into the winter where there's another little peak as well. And then also we can see, what our usage was in the same month last year. That's shown here on this little table where we can see we used this much in this month and this much in the same month last year. So were we more efficient with our energy? Were we less? And I always find it's helpful to also take a look at right here where we can see the average temperature in degrees during that billing period. sometimes we might find that we have a spike in our usage compared to the previous year, and it's difficult for us to understand why did that happen. Well, it might be temperature related. We had a January, what was it? This past January, I think, that was almost 10 degrees colder on average over the entire billing period than the previous year. Naturally, I think we all felt that on our utility bills. So that's there, and then we can also see our 12-month usage as well as our average monthly electricity usage. In addition to that, we can see here on the next page how it all gets broken down. So this is oftentimes the third page. The second page is disclaimers and the rest of their language. But here on the the third page, you can see what the reading was on the meter, so what they tracked it was versus what the previous reading was when they last billed you, and that's how they find what the energy used is during that period. That, of course, is what they're going to then be able to bill you for, and you can see how they break that down here in the chart below. Before we get too deep here, I'm going to jump over to our next slide because that's where we can get into a little bit more specifics in terms of what these charges are. So breaking it down. So this is where we can look at actually understanding how we're billed for this electricity. Some of the key terms that are typically going to be found on these bills, and this goes for many utilities, not just Duke Energy, you're going to find that you've got some form of a basic customer charge. Sometimes they call this a facilities charge. It might just be their base fee, as they call it. This is essentially the fixed cost that you're going to be paying every single month, regardless of how much energy used. And so for customers here on Duke Energy, what that looks like is $14. Every month, you're going to have that line on your bill of $14. Some utilities, this is higher. Many we work with, it's $25 or even $30 a month as their base facility charge. And so that's helpful to understand that that's just the fixed cost that they are essentially charging you and billing you to have an account set up, to have a meter on site for them to be supplying your electricity. Then come energy charges. And so what you can see here is something that's interesting. Depending on the utility, there are different ways that they might bill you for your energy usage. But in the case of Duke here, they're typically billing the first 800 kilowatt hours at one rate, and then any kilowatt hours used over and above that at another rate, and a slightly decreased rate in this case. So you see that those are both broken out, but that's just the sum of your overall usage. So we use 1749. In this case, it's split 800 and 949. And other utilities, you might see that they break it out by time of use, which would mean that they're going to bill you differently depending upon the time of day in which you use that electricity. So it would be broken out in that way. And we talked a lot about time of use in our last webinar, and if you missed that and you wanted to check it out, you can go to YouTube and learn a little bit more about how those breakouts are done and what the different time periods can look like depending on the utility. Then you have what's called the storm recovery charge, which has a lot to do with weather patterns and what events might occur and drainage and essentially what Duke is going to have to recoup to be able to make up for that. And so when there's damage nearby and they have to deal with it to their grid, then they're able to bill that back to the customers. There's really not anything that happens to Duke from a cost perspective that in some way, shape, or form, they're not going to be able to recoup that cost back through ratepayers. And so this is one example of that. In this case, we're looking at, what is ultimately under even just a cent. So it's not a full cent per kilowatt hour in this case, but that's there as well. Now I skipped over kilowatt hour. So just to be clear here, kilowatt hour is a measure of the energy that we use over time, right? And so for many of us, we're using, no matter how much you turn on, whatever your load is measured over an hour, that average is what's going to produce that kilowatt hours of usage. And so if you have 800 kilowatt hours, 949 kilowatt hours, that's a measurement of how much energy you use during that period. We'll look a little bit more here at exactly what that could mean for what your build. But the average home here in North Carolina probably uses somewhere around 1,500 to 1,600 kilowatt hours. But depending on the size and how many people are in that home and what those usage patterns look like, that can vary from as little as 1,000 kilowatt hours a month to as many as 3,000, 4,000, or even more kilowatt hours in a month. So we'll look at that more in a moment as well. We talked about the storm recovery charge. Next, you have other riders. And so in this case, this clean energy rider, just to be clear about what this is just Duke being able to charge customers for the work that they're doing to provide clean energy solutions on the grid. Instead of, you being able to have solar yourself, if you don't have solar, even if you don't have solar, they're going to bill you for what they're doing to have clean energy solutions on their grid. So that of course is one reason why we think it's much better for homeowners to have the ability to incorporate those solutions themselves. But that's just an example of one of those riders. There are plenty of others that they might add on from time to time. Then we have the biggest mystery maybe of the last year to year and a half, or even 2 years now, I guess it's maybe been, is the summary of rider adjustments. And it's about as vague as it sounds. So the summary of rider adjustments is essentially Duke capturing what could be a number of different costs and fees that they have taken on outside of the scope of their traditional billing. So let's say that fuel costs changed dramatically in one way or another over a billing period because of the way that they have agreed upon being able to recoup that cost through their utilities commission. They're able to capture that here in the summary of rider adjustments. So if you were to go look up what the summary of rider adjustments is, Duke will make it clear from their perspective that rider adjustment is no new cost, that's something that we have been paying as ratepayers before, and that they've actually broken it out in an effort to be more transparent. What I think is not helpful about the way that it's displayed on many of these bills is that it doesn't communicate how it's billed. And the reality is that it is a cost per kilowatt hour. And so when we look at the amount of energy that we use, if someone uses 2,000 kilowatt hours and someone else uses 1,000 kilowatt hours, then the summary of rider adjustment line item for that 2,000 kilowatt hour user is going to be double what the user of 1,000 kilowatt hours is going to be. So it's important that when we look at savings calculations and we consider what someone can save with solar, what the real effective rate of electricity that you're paying is per kilowatt hour, that we take into account that summary of rider adjustments. And that's a bit of a moving target. That's a lot, from time to time, that's going to adjust from 1 month to the next. But it's not uncommon for us to see that land somewhere between 2 to 3 cents of additional cost that homeowners are paying on top of their traditional rates. Okay, so in addition to that, you could possibly have some additional services that pop up. This is always good to understand, just to be aware of these costs. We talk time to time with homeowners who are paying for a surge protection cost through their utility and weren't aware that they were paying for that. You can have a whole home surge protection device installed by an electrical contractor. You don't need to pay for that service through Duke if you would not like to. So it just really just depends on if you are intending to pay for some of those products and services. You might also see in some cases, if you have a street light that's right out in front of your house, sometimes that cost gets passed on to you. You might have a line item for that. And lastly here, of course, is sales tax. Of course, since we have 7% sales tax in the state of North Carolina, what you're going to find is that your cost per kilowatt hour is going to have a post-tax effective rate. So even if you're paying, 12 to 13 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on your utility, that's likely pre-tax. And so every kilowatt hour that you use from the utility costs you, much closer to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's just something that we like to be aware of when we're looking at how much electricity we're using and what the actual cost is to a homeowner. So jumping on down here to our next slide, next I wanted to take a moment to look at what are the appliances that actually have the biggest influence on how much energy that we're using. And what's interesting is I actually, at my home, I have solar at my house. I like to be aware of how much energy I'm using. And I recently installed a Nest thermostat, learning thermostat, as a lot of folks have. And this graph here on the right is actually a chart from my home from yesterday of how frequently my heat kicked on. We're in a bit of a cold snap here in Wilmington for us, right, in mid-November. And this just goes to show my heat ran almost 4.5, 5 hours yesterday. And that, of course, is going to be the biggest user. Studies have shown that for many homeowners in the country, heating and cooling is as much as 50% or even more of our overall energy costs. The next highest one you're going to see is going to be water heating, whereas cooking and lighting and refrigeration kind of follow in that path. In addition to those more traditional electricity users, things that people don't possibly plan for, they're building a home, they buy a home, and it has some of these things, is pool heating, a pool pump. The amount of electricity that consumes is going to depend on how frequently you're using it, what type of pump you have, how much you're heating it. But that's something that, of course, is going to exponentially increase your usage. Next is EV charging. When you're charging at your house, you're saving a ton compared to purchasing gasoline or even charging at a fast charger out on the highway. But you're still spending a lot on electricity because you're using that electricity at home, and it's going to see a significant spike to that usage. And then, of course, we have hot tubs as well. That's when we hear about, well, I've got a jacuzzi, I got a hot tub. It's like, well, those are sort of electricity guzzlers. So just being aware how much those appliances can use and what impact they might have on your overall electricity consumption is important. So now diving just a little bit deeper into the historical utility rate trends in North Carolina. Since 2000, the average residential cost of electricity in North Carolina was around 6.48 cents per kilowatt hour. Now Duke Energy prices have risen to nearly 15 cents per kilowatt hour and a little bit over that after rider adjustments, taxes. That's more than doubling over 25 years. It's also important to recognize the backdrop of inflation and just changing purchasing power of the dollar. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, prices have increased by roughly 84% between 2000 and 2024, meaning that $1 today buys about the same amount as 53 cents did back in 2000. Electricity rates have historically risen steadily higher and outpaced that same inflation rate. And some of the biggest causes to that increase in inflation are fuel and supply chain costs. So specifically talking about, gas fuel costs and the variability in those, grid reliability upgrades. Our demand has just extremely expanded, specifically here in North Carolina, where population growth has been so rapid. Our grid wasn't designed to keep up with it. And then also regulatory adjustments. So some of the things that, Duke Energy is doing to policy wise to change where the energy is coming from, how they purchase it, what they're able to make in terms of margins and getting those things approved with the North Carolina Utilities Commission. It might be difficult to see here, but we do have a graph here from the just depicting, the cost of electricity over time. I'm going to jump over to our next slide because I actually think it's designed to be there instead. And so this speaks to this more specifically. Before jumping into some of the numbers here on the left, I just wanted to take a moment to highlight here what these figures have looked like over the last just 8 years. So this is a bullet here of the cost per kilowatt hour, average cost per kilowatt hour in North Carolina for homeowners since 2017. So this is January 2017. That rate would have been about 10.3 cents per kilowatt hour. Now jumping forward to about 2024, and even in 2025, that's been as high as 15.3 cents per kilowatt hour. If the average homeowner in North Carolina uses about 1,600 kilowatt hours a month, then that average bill in January of 2017 was only about $180.80. Whereas now it's as high as $260.80. That's nearly a 50% increase in utility costs in 8 years. So at that rate, our cost per electricity is increasing about 6% year over year. That's fast, much outpacing inflation, and just is a figure that isn't sustainable. And yet it's the story that we've seen in many other states as well. So here's a case study from Texas, where we can see that they were actually able to keep pretty steady electricity costs. We can see here from 2014 to 2016, they actually saw a reduction in the average cost per kilowatt hour. before a slight increase into 2018 and then into 2019, with even a plateau before 2021 saw a massive jump. And so some of the factors that contributed to that large increase were rapid population growth. Texas has been growing rapidly, but much of their fuel source has been fossil fuel dependent. And so they've seen price volatility from a utility perspective. They also have seen some significant grid reliability concerns and damaging weather events. Most specifically, they had a winter storm in 2021 that really kickstarted much of the increases that were to come. And so it's just an example of an aging grid taking on some damage and that cost being incurred by the utility to repair and upgrade and really build out a grid that's going to be able to support growth, being costly to the consumer. And so what we saw here in Texas was a 26.4% increase in electricity rates since 2014, so over 10 years to 2024, which in and of itself doesn't sound so bad, but the problem is 25% of that was just in the last 3 to 4 years. And so they've seen a massive jump in just such a short time. Now, when we look at the state of Virginia, it's more of the same. You know, their story is more so related to, yes, fossil fuel price volatility, but also just the demand for data centers, which is something we're seeing more and more of as well, and grid reliability concerns, an aging grid. And so Virginia saw nearly a 30% increase since 2014. But again, the problem there is that 20% of that was just in the last 4 years. So that's an average of 5% per year. And so when we look at what's ahead, I think we see a common theme here, right? Which is that, the pressures that are on the grid and future rate expectations are that we're going to need to continue generating more power through population growth, but also data centers and AI computing facilities, electric vehicle adoption, and just general electrification. More and more home appliances are purely electric. And I thought this was an interesting study and graph from the U.S. Energy Information Administration that just showed the anticipated usage of electricity largely coming from commercial computing, and that could surpass what we're currently using from space heating and cooling. So that's, a 30-year projection, but I think it just goes to show how massively we can anticipate data centers, AI, to put additional strain and demand on a grid that really isn't ready for it. And so these next two slides are actually borrowed from our friends at the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. They're such a great resource for this type of data, understanding what we can expect from a utility perspective. They help advocate for policy for North Carolinians to make sure that their rates stay down as much as possible. And these slides were a part of a webinar we did with Matt Abel, their executive director, some months ago. And so I hope he's okay. Us haven't borrowed them again. But what we can see here on this slide is speaking specifically to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is projected to lead to 18% increase in electricity rates. Those rate increases are in addition to increases we've seen from Duke Energy on the last 3 years of 6.8%. 3.4%, 3.7%. And lastly, I wanted to acknowledge that the North Carolina Senate Bill 266 is anticipated to lead to $23 billion in cost for ratepayers. The North Carolina Senate Bill 266 was passed after first being vetoed by our governor and then, overridden by the committee. And so what Senate Bill 266 does is it allows Duke Energy to submit for and the ability to recoup costs, not just for completed projects that they have done that will increase production, which is the normal pathway, but they will have the ability to recoup costs by way of ratepayers for projects that are not yet completed. So they can go and begin construction on new development, whether it be, a natural gas plant, whatever it might be, a coal plant, and they have the ability to begin recouping that cost through their ratepayers. And it's anticipated to lead to a number of additional costs to consumers. And here's largely why, again, we anticipate additional increases. You know, currently, this was even just a couple years ago, that we've seen a bit of a plateau in terms of electricity demand over the last decade or two, outside of just increases from population growth. But now we're seeing what's anticipated to be an immense increase in demand from obviously the population growth continuing, but more so data centers, manufacturing, and AI requiring gigawatts and gigawatts of additional power. And just as a summary, new electricity demand in North Carolina would require equivalent electricity to power 5 small states. So that's just a level of electricity demand increasing in such a short period that we have not been prepared for. And ultimately, the utilities are going to have to solve for it, and it's likely to lead to even higher increases on consumers. Of course, we're a solar installer, and so to bring things full circle, you know, our intent is to put the control back into the hands of the homeowner. Right now, you pay an electricity bill. If you are a solar customer, then you know, I don't have to say this to you, but if you don't have solar and you're paying your utility bill every month, then you have a bill that you can't predict what it might be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And so you're at the whim of what those costs look like from the utility. And so the impact of solar and how solar can help homeowners take back that control is that it generates power and offsets the grid consumption and insulates you from that future rate inflation. And so just to give an example here of what that could look like in the absence of being able to produce that electricity yourself, is a look ahead to what a utility bill might look like. You know, we looked at a moment ago a $260 utility bill for 1,600 kilowatt hours of usage. That same bill with just a 4% increase year over year, which is what we've seen, if not conservative. In 5 years, you'd see $313.84. In 10 years, $378.36. In 20 years, $552, and in 25 years, over $600 for that same usage that you're currently paying $260 a month now. So that's what we have to look ahead to. If we're not able to find solutions, whether it be through solar, obviously, I think, you know, utilities are trying to solve for it as well. But the reality is more electricity is needed, and solutions like solar allow us to take back control and produce energy ourselves, and not be dependent upon the utility to solve that problem of where that electricity is going to come from. Here we have a specific example of a customer of ours, that same customer of ours, who went solar and the impact on their bill after the fact. Their utility bill was $284.14. This was in April. That's actually a lower usage month compared to some others. Whereas this homeowner had a credit of $1.29 here in the month of September, which, as many of you know, is not a cold month. That's a month where we've got HVAC running. It's oftentimes one of our highest months, and in fact, it had been for this particular homeowner previously. Now, this homeowner is also taking advantage of some additional programs with battery storage, which allows them to get a credit and receive that negative bill. And so depending on your utility and your situation, that may be the case, but even without that, this bill at most would have been likely $50 to $100 and would have been saving, you know, $250 or more. And so I think it just goes to show that, you know, when we talk about what these systems can save, that the savings are real. And it's when you have a utility cost of even $25 to $50 a month, the impact to you when those electricity rates go up year over year is pennies on the dollar compared to what it would be with a $200 or more bill every month. And so if you're interested in learning more about what your savings could look like on your home, and if it's a good fit for you, then of course, feel free to reach out to book a call with a member of our team and go through the process of exploring it. Our roles at Cape Fear Solar are really just to be educators in terms of how solar could help you. If it's not a good fit, that's okay too. If you just want to contact us, you can do so there via the QR code on the left, or give us a call at 910-409-5533. Before jumping into our Q&A, my email is gabe@capefearsolarsystems.com. So you're also welcome to follow up with me there for any ideas on upcoming webinars or questions that you'd like to connect on as well. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and jump into our Q&A. Before opening up to any questions that our guest had, I did want to take a moment, JP, to just ask you. I know much of your work is in Brunswick County, where many homeowners are on Brunswick Electric as their utility provider. And they went under a change here at the beginning of the month on their billing structure. And in addition to that, saw some impact to effective rates to consumers. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro, Gabe. Yeah, Duke Energy, obviously, the last 5 or 6 years has been pretty brutal with their rate increases, but historically, Brunswick Electric has been pretty conservative with their rate increases, usually, 1.5%, 2% a year. So they also haven't changed how people are billed. It's always been the traditional, 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Um, but yeah, on November 1st, they hit their customers with a 7% rate increase. Not only that, but it's a pretty brutal time of use rate structure with off-peak and on-peak. With the on-peak window being 2 to 6 p.m. during the summertime and 6 to 9 a.m. during the winter. So it's a significant change. A lot of people are going to see a significant impact on their bills moving forward. Not only that, but after meeting with Brunswick Electric, when we found out about this change, they were pretty transparent about setting expectations with us, and they actually met with, I want to say it was like 50 members, homeowners, to discuss these changes. They were very transparent about expecting a 3 to 4% rate increase every year moving forward. And I think the takeaway for folks at that meeting was 3 or 4% is probably the floor for expected rate increases moving forward. So this conservative, co-op who historically has done a good job with keeping rates pretty low, is saying this to their members. I don't really know what it means for the large players for Duke Energy. I'm even more worried for, Duke customers because they've been at 5 to 7% pretty much every year. And if these small co-ops are increasing rates 3, 4, 5%, I don't think it's crazy to anticipate double-digit rate increases in the years to come. So this is why we're here, is to help folks solve that problem, because it is coming. Harder and bigger than ever. It's going to be rough. So, we're here to help. And I would anticipate some big rate changes in the coming years.
Thanks for sharing that, John. Yeah, I think it's really frightening to think about what it could look like. I actually looked at my most recent bill before hopping on here today. And like I mentioned earlier, I have solar in my own home, and most months I'm able to offset the vast majority of my usage, and many months I maybe even have just the connection fee, that $14. Whereas some of these months, especially as it started to get colder, I haven't maybe been as conscientious about how much energy we're using in our home. And I got billed this past month for $50. But what I was surprised to see is that when I took out the base facilities charge of that cost, and I looked at what I actually paid per kilowatt hour after the kilowatt hour charges, as well as the summary of rider adjustments and everything else that goes into it, I paid an effective rate of about 17 cents per kilowatt hour in this most recent billing period. And that may not be the case for everyone. That was, maybe that was an exceptional month for me where they were catching up on a rider adjustment from a previous month. I don't know, but that really kind of shook me in my boots to say, holy smokes, I can't imagine what my bill would have been if I hadn't had solar. And to that point, Caleb, you've obviously been with us for the last several years as a member of our team, but had the opportunity to work in our industry out in Arizona before coming to North Carolina. And I was hoping you could take a moment just to speak to your experience out there, what you've seen in the form of rate increases in your time working in the industry, and any stories you might have as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, like Gabe said, I started in Arizona and naturally still keep in touch with quite a few of my customers whenever they have a neighbor or a family member that's interested in solar. They ask me to help them, even though I have to send them elsewhere now. But yeah, one of the really neat things to look back on in some of those conversations is, well, a lot of those clients were really breaking even from day one, which in their head was still a great investment. Looking back on rate increases, effectively when they purchased their solar system, they were able to hedge against inflation at a rate of about 10 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Arizona's great for solar, but they've also been hit by some pretty rapid rate increases from things coming over from California and electric issues in California, which I don't think is out of the ordinary that that same situation happens here with all the AI data centers going into Virginia as well. But where they're at right now, I mean, they're paying anywhere from 18 to 24 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on what utility company they're on. So those folks that were able to lock their rates in at say 10, 11 cents, they're now paying half of what their neighbors are paying for energy that don't have solar. So it makes it a very simple investment whenever you can look back in a 5 year span and say, hey, this bill I'm paying for $120. If I was in my neighbor's house, I'm going to pay $240. And one of the neat things to see as well is some of those folks have moved out of their house, and having that solar system on their home is a huge selling point to people in Arizona because the way they're looking at it is, hey, this house is essentially going to cost me half as much to pay for electricity than it would if I didn't have that solar system. So one of my favorite analogies is if you could go back 20 years and buy a gas card and they said, hey, if you buy this card, you'll never pay more than this for gasoline. I think we all would have done it. And I think that's the same thing that's happening with solar here. If you can lock a rate in somewhere that's predictable, it truly does make it a no-brainer over time.
Thanks for that, Caleb. Yeah, that's a cool analogy, and I think it is just a testament to. I think in the moment, we look at it. Well, I'm paying so much for electricity. It can't get worse than this. It can. It'll get worse, right? I think plenty of people would have thought 10, 11 cents felt like a lot a few years ago, and we're just seeing it continue to go up.
Gabe, when we first started it, so Gabe and I joined the company around the same year. I want to say late 2019. Um, I think that the kilowatt hour rate with Duke Energy was what, 10.5 cents?
Yep.
So, I mean, that was 5 years ago. 10.5 versus 15 cents. That's like a 40% rate increase over that 5 year period. And 17 cents in your case, I mean, you're north of 60%
Yeah,
over that 5 years. So it's very, very real.
absolutely. Well, on that note, I just want to say thank you for everyone who joined today's webinar. If you have any questions for any of us and you want to connect, feel free. Please do reach out. Otherwise, thank you again for joining. We'll be back next month with a new webinar, and keep an eye out for the emails. If you are a customer, you're also likely getting our new customer newsletter, so keep an eye out for that and let us know if you have any questions or if there's anything we can do to help. Thanks again and have a good night.